Thumbs up.
Sorry, so preoccupied with the chair.
Good evening, staff, council, citizens. This is the study session for the City of Littleton City Council for Tuesday, October 25th, 2016. It's 6:30 in the evening. Councilmember Valdez will not be available this evening to be at this session. Otherwise, the rest of council is here. And we're going to go through two items on an agenda tonight. We have Council Agenda A is ID 16-256, and that is 255, I'm sorry. That is the council review with a representative from Waters and Company regarding the city manager and city attorney search. And then item B is ID number 16-253, which will be a joint meeting with the South Suburban Board for intergovernmental agreement and management plan update. So we'll take a little break between item A and B in order to set that up. We anticipate about a max of about 30 minutes with our representative from Waters and Company, and somewhere between an hour and a half, around an hour and a half or so, probably on the South Platte Park, because there's a 130-page draft and a PowerPoint that they need to present to me. So with that, we're going to proceed. Our first item is item A. Again, that's ID 16-255. That's a council review with representative from Waters and Company regarding the city manager and city attorney search. And Chuck Rohr is our representative this evening to talk with us about that. Sir.
All right, well, Mayor, Council, and Interim City Manager, it's a pleasure to be here. Let us thank you again for the opportunity to serve this council and the Littleton community in terms of this recruitment. We're honored to be selected for both these processes. Let me talk about three things briefly, if I may. First of those is we have not completed the data gathering. Tomorrow I'll be meeting with departmental directors most of the day, and then we'll follow that up with a written document that basically captures a recruitment profile of the city manager and the city attorney. Individual documents that talk about the community, talks about the municipal organization, talks about the position itself as it's structured by the city charter and the job description. It'll talk about the desirable qualifications, experience. We'll write a profile of the ideal candidate, if there were a perfect candidate out there, what he or she would look like in terms of experience and approach. And then we'll also talk about the issues and challenges that confront the municipal organization and how each of these positions would factor into that in serving you and the community. A recurring theme, if you will, in all the conversations today, I did have the opportunity to speak to the mayor and each of the council members. A couple of recurring themes. One of those is you want a highly experienced individual who is willing to bring his or her talents to the community for an extended period of time. You're not looking for a stepping stone. You're not looking for a short timer. You're looking for someone who desires to invest in the community and to serve you over an extended period of time. Another conversation that came up frequently was you're looking for an individual that manages openly and transparently in terms of communication with the staff, communication with the city council, and communication with the residents. You're looking for an individual who has strong experience in the areas that you being a relatively full-service city, I know you don't have water, but you have more services because of your service contracts in a lot of other cities in your population bracket, and an individual with the talent to manage at that higher level. Also an individual who understands development codes, understands the city charter, understands the law, as it applies to your situation. Some of the issues that were presented that these individuals might deal with in the first year or two is one of those may or may not be a long-term issue, and that is your urban renewal. Understand you have some decisions to be made potentially before the end of this year regarding that, but if that is a long-term ongoing program, the manager will need to bring leadership and expertise to that effort. You also have infrastructure needs. Managers should bring creative funding strategies for council consideration and be open to innovative ways of meeting those infrastructure needs. You have, because of your service contracts with areas outside your community in the fire, then you'll need to deal with the funding mechanisms for those and the continued provision of fire services outside the area and ways to maximize the efficiency of those, the safety of the individuals involved, and provide a superlative level of service. There were some other issues brought up, but those seem to be the ones that came up most frequently, and I wouldn't want to draw or close the door on that because we still need to get staff input, additional input, and we will provide that feedback to you in a written document. Another area is the timing of these recruitment efforts. I provided a proposed timeline, which essentially had you selecting finalists on December 20th. We have milestones for completing the recruitment brochure, placing the ads, reaching out to candidates, sorting through those candidates. We utilize some questionnaires to get more information from those candidates, and all of that are various milestones. The date that seems to be in question is when can we get together and select the finalists. If you're going to interview them early in January, then they need to be selected by somewhere in the ballpark of December 20th, or that can be deferred till after the first of the year when you make that selection. If you make that selection of finalists early in January, we ask for 10 business days from the time you do select a finalist. We ask for 10 business days to complete background checks, to verify credentials, and also to publish the interview materials so we get them here in a timely manner and you have an opportunity to review them before the interview. We just don't want to hand you an interview book the day you're facing candidates and say, go forth and interview. That's, you're certainly going to look at those materials, become familiar with the bios and the written documents related to those, and we want to get those to you in a timely fashion. So I guess that's one of the items that we may not be able to resolve that tonight, but we need to look at when the council would be available to do that finalist selection.
And Eric is here tonight, just to review kind of where we were at with that date selection and maybe help us pin down maybe he has a couple other dates to propose, and we know we may need to do this over the phone or again with another selection by email, but Eric wants to kind of keep us up on that.
Okay, so we had a conflict on December the 20th for the date when you would select the candidates to bring in, kind of an important meeting that everybody be present for. So we put a poll out recommending December 15th or 16th or January 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th. And thus far, we don't have any date where everybody can meet. We have the closest date would be the 15th, or the 3rd. So those two dates might be revisited if folks wanted to add that back into a poll. And then we, speaking with Chuck earlier, we have a few extra dates that we could put in to another poll and put that out as well.
So Jerry is not here this evening, but he did give us his times. I don't know that we have Bill's on there.
Yeah, Bill, we don't have any of your availability for the 15th or 6th. 15th works. So if that works, then is that a date that would also work for you?
Yeah, I've got a fine arts board meeting, but that, I can miss that.
Okay, so if everybody can work on that date, then that puts everybody on the 15th. So it looks like if Bill can make it, and Peggy, if you can also make it on that date, then that would give us Thursday.
Jerry had selected that.
Jerry had already selected that date as well. And so if that's a date that works for everybody, then we can make that the official date.
So Chuck, is that a date that you can work with? That's 5 days sooner than the original timeline.
We can make that work, Mayor.
Okay, I think we have a date.
Excuse me, is that a daytime, evening? What's,
So Chuck, why don't you talk about what we would do that day? It's on the timeline as our selection of a candidate from written materials and meeting with you.
What is proposed right now is we'll complete the interviews with the rest of the stakeholders, in this case, the departmental directors, tomorrow. And I'll commit to have a written document to you by Friday of this week, which captures, as I mentioned, the community, the position, the desirable attributes, the compensation range, and all of that for your review. If I can get that document back by early part of next week, early to mid part of next week, then we would get that over to, we have a graphics firm that puts all the images and logos and makes it an attractive marketing piece to market the position. So we would start advertising middle part of next week, reaching out to candidates. We think it's important to have those documents in place because candidates get frustrated if they see some communication and say, well, we'll get that to you in a week or two. That doesn't work very well. So we like to have those in place prior to actively reaching out to candidates. We would complete the review or have the apply by date of December 5th. And then immediately after that, we'll send out questionnaires to the candidates who appear to most closely meet your qualifications. There's actually 2 questionnaires. One is a candidate questionnaire, which will ask specific questions that may not be covered in the candidate's resume because people do resumes in 1,000 different formats, and some discuss some things, not the others that may be of interest to you. And these questionnaires drive the candidates to address the areas of your specific concern. And then secondarily, there's a due diligence questionnaire which assists us in determining if there's issues within a candidate's background that may not reflect favorably on them or the city. We would have that information to you. We would publish binders for you that contains the resume, the questionnaires, and the cover letter of the candidates that we suggest we move forward. It'll also contain a listing of all applicants. So if for some reason we selected an individual or did not select an individual to move forward, that you might look at a name and title and say, well, that might be a pretty good person. Sometimes we've had that candidate in a previous recruitment and learned some things that we have some knowledge that may indicate that that person wouldn't be a good fit. Or sometimes it's just a different interpretation. But the final decision is up to you. This is your recruitment. And we're not going to make any decisions that supplant your judgment. So if you ask us to include those individuals, we will. Then we'll also have video recordings done by these candidates, so you can review them, so you'll have the paper documentation, also a video clip. When we get together and talk about those candidates, you'll have some detailed information, and then on that date, we can select the finalists, the number you're comfortable with. Could be 4, 5, 6, even 7. And then once you have made that determination, that's when we'll do the detailed background investigations and have that information for you prior to the interviews. So you'll get the books around December 5th. We'll meet, sounds like about December 15th to actually select the finalists.
So we also have a stage in there where we get community input. Can you talk about where that would fit into this?
And we have a survey document that we'll provide for your review, and then we can place that on our website. We encourage you to place it on your website. So if staff and/or community wants to provide input related to this, we can gather that, and then you'll have that information for your interview process.
So, council, do you have any questions for Chuck?
Just on the timing for the community survey, Chuck, what's the rough idea that you expect on that?
We usually like to have the surveys up about 10 business days,
So that's 10 days before the selection of
or
finalists?
10 calendar days, rather, I'm sorry, calendar days.
So that would be the beginning of December then?
We could actually start that survey anytime. We can have that information for you. If we could start it in the next few days and have it up about 10 days and then compile the data, or we could do it a little later in the process, whichever works best for this council.
I'm just thinking if it ends up being too close to Thanksgiving, we might not get the response, although I'm not sure how heavy it would be, but you know, folks tend to get a little, you know, I'm thinking post All Hallows Eve and sometime before Thanksgiving in that window there.
We could certainly do that. It's very variable from community to community. Sometimes we'll get 25 responses, sometimes we'll get 250, or somewhere in between. So it's hard to predict. Part of it is some communities are more driven towards community input and more used to community members providing input and being vocal about what they are interested. Other communities, there's almost a level of apathy. I don't detect that here, but in some communities, it's we elected you to handle that, so you make those decisions. So I can't predict how many responses we'll get.
Well, let's have you work at come up with a date, maybe working with Eric, but for sure, we want to make sure that we have some time either side of the holiday. You know, if it makes it a little more than 10 business days because of the holiday, that would be appropriate, because we want to make sure people who are leaving town for, 4, 5, 6 days around the holidays don't miss the opportunity.
There's nothing magic about 10 days. I would like it to be up at least 10 days, but we could leave it up 20 days but usually after the first 10 days or so, the responses tend to really trickle off.
Let's coordinate that. We can coordinate that with Eric, I think. And then the other opportunity for the community involvement is when we get down to another point in the selection process, and that's part of the interviews, et cetera, that we would conduct at that time. I think the feeling that we have was, that we'd had as a council, if I'm saying it correctly, was some form of interview structured so that different spectrums and different segments of the community, the staff, the leadership would all get a chance to meet these candidates. And so I'm not sure where we're at in that process also.
We'll work towards an interview strategy that involves the stakeholders you want, and over the next few weeks, we can work towards that, and there maybe some work on your part in terms of identifying who those stakeholders are in terms of participation, but we'll certainly work with you on that.
Questions for Chuck?
If we're going to do a community input to the web, what are we going to do with that if that comes after we've developed the profile?
Actually, it's a tool to utilize in your interview process. You have the sense of the pulse of the community in terms of what they would like to see in the city manager, and when you interview those candidates, you can match them up to that.
Wouldn't it make more sense for that community survey to take place and then that to be incorporated in the profile,
We could do that, but
the schedule?
the only concern is that, basically, that means I wouldn't write the profile for another 2 or 3 weeks, and so it can be either useful information to develop the profile or useful information to incorporate in the interview process. But if we were to do the survey now and utilize that in the profile, probably wouldn't be interviewing candidates until late January, maybe mid-February. I'm open to that, but that's a council decision.
Any other council input on that concept, on that issue?
At least in the ones I've perused in the past and looked at, it tends to be factual, and then how council perceives the issues. It's not as much on the areas of personality that might come up in some of, but a lot of what you've said are important items that have come through. I would hate to sacrifice the calendar at this point in time when there may be very limited input. I don't expect anything that's going to come out that we couldn't incorporate in the interviews themselves.
Let me ask a question, since you've talked to all of council. I'm not talking loud enough. Are we doing better? No. Better?
Perfect, yeah.
I've got to hold it in my lap here. You talk with all of us. Did you, based on the things that we said, how rich a tapestry did we create for you? How varied a tapestry? Because I have the sense that we were not just duplicates of each other. And
We're not. I think it would be fair to say that the council is not homogeneous at this point, that there are different viewpoints on, not to say anybody's right, anybody's wrong, they're just different ways of looking at the same thing. I think that perhaps a talented and effective city manager might help you in that regard in terms of bringing this council together. It probably will be a factor in the recruitment. Some candidates are gonna, they'll view videos, they will draw their own conclusions. I mean, I can market this and I can talk to people and I can tell them things are a certain way, but some candidates will draw their own conclusions. Probably there was differences of opinion, urban renewal, differences of opinion on some similar issues.
So what I was trying to get at is, based on the rainbow of perspectives from council, it would seem to me that you won't get too much richer rainbow in the process and the front end. So the giving the citizens significant opportunity later is probably going to take care of not having them directly involved earlier? That was a leading question. I'd be thrown out of court, but
I think it'll provide valuable information that you can incorporate in your interview process, and we've done that on a number of occasions. We have done it on a few occasions where the survey is a part of the profile development, the initial profile development, but in most cases, when we're brought in, there's a sense of urgency. We need to move expeditiously and find a talented and effective city manager. We don't want to wait a month or whatever the case may be to get started on doing that.
I would agree with Phil.
Bill?
I agree. I don't want to sacrifice the calendar. I think the citizen input is very important to get. I think if we look at it, the manager works for the council, but has considerable interaction with the citizens. So we need to consider that very strongly. But the primary relationship is going to be established by those earlier interviews. But it needs to be fine-tuned later, but that we can do that in interviews. If it means to sacrifice the calendar, ideally, I'd like to get it done early, but I don't want to.
So what I'm hearing is we stick with the plan that you had originally proposed. Doug, do you have anything additional?
If we're going to ask for citizen input, I think it's important for us to describe how it is that we're going to use the citizen input. Can I suggest that we get the citizen input and incorporate that into our decision process for the finalists, if we're not going to put it into the profile? Because once you've narrowed it down to the finalists, then the interview process is pretty late in the process for citizens' input. For example, if you hear, and I don't think we're going to get a significant divergence from the citizens' input than what we've had from the council, which was Peggy's point of view. But if you,
Representative.
pardon?
We are representative.
But if we got, for instance, from citizens' input that they had somebody, they wanted somebody from the private sector, just to give you an example, and if you're only taking that into account by the time you're interviewing the finalist, and you've picked 5 finalists, none of which come from the private sector, then what's the point of asking for the citizen input?
Yeah, but doesn't the calendar, if we put it out 10 or more business days in November, we'll have it before December 15th?
We could actually start, I just need to draft the survey document, get it here for your review, then we put it into the program. It's a computerized program, and then we have it available for people to go in and make the selections. And so we could start that survey early next week, if that's the council's pleasure. Then you can utilize it as you will.
And we're not selecting the finalists till December 15th.
That's fine. I mean, it's, the timing, if we're not going to do it for the profile, the timing's probably not an issue. I just think that we need to be able to explain to the citizens, if we're going to ask for their input, and we're going to do it through a website, how it's going to be incorporated in the process, so that they know.
And to your point as well, I mean, citizens have relationships with the city manager that we don't, and I think it's important for us to understand those.
Yeah.
And as we pick the manager, but, we can fine tune that as we move along.
So just the clarification would be to move as quickly as appropriate without changing anything to do with our timeline to get it online. We will review the questions and see what those mean to us, and then we'll review the answers also and see how those it should be incorporated depending on where we are in the process, but we're not going to change your process, I think is what I'm hearing.
Well, when I send you the draft of the recruitment profile, I'll also send a draft of a proposed survey for your review before we do anything with it.
We there?
Yeah, I'm assuming that this is, the process going to be described to the public through the Littleton Report or something. I just think that we ought to describe where it is we're going to use this input if we're going to solicit it.
So, yeah, and Eric, that's something you can help put together, I think, with their documents, and then, because you know the format of the Littleton report, to try to get it in a format that we can release it to the public, and if we're going to go monthly, we might be able to do a couple iterations of that, keep it up to date. I'm just guessing.
We can do that.
Okay. Any other questions for Chuck? Phil?
Just, you said typically 4 to 7 finalists in this type of a recruitment. Chuck, does that correspond to the bounds? I mean, I know there's costs that are associated with more versus fewer.
Well, I don't want you to, it's always been my approach to recommend that you interview at least 4, because if you, let's say for just argument's sake, you pick 3, and one of those happens to take another job the week of the interview, or one of them comes and said, well, I thought I'd like Littleton, but I decided I don't.
You're talking about a ballot measure that went before Colorado with regard to state employment criteria that had a limit of 3 before, that's now been opened up.
But but I just think if you get down to 3, then that puts you almost at the mercy of the candidates if one of them were to withdraw, or you didn't think one of them measured up to what you were seeking. If you have a broader menu, in most cases in city managers, most of the city manager recruitments I've done, and I've done many, it's 4 to 6, sometimes 7, but that's rare, usually 4 to 6.
Okay, thank you.
And just one more comment then, and I know in my conversations with you, we talked in some detail about the city attorney, and so can you address the city attorney process real quickly and integrate it then into what we're doing with the city manager?
We'll probably be right behind in terms of, as an example, we'll send you a city manager profile, then a few days later, city attorney. The principal difference in the input was the council seemed to be open to candidates from other states for the city manager. The consensus was they need to be an experienced Colorado attorney for the city attorney. But now keep in mind, some candidates are maybe licensed or members of the bar in a number of different states. So you may have a person who's previously worked in Colorado, they now work in Kansas, Missouri, whatever state, but they're still have that Colorado experience. But I think your focus was on in-state candidates for that. Then also the person should have a background in municipal law in its facets, employment law, land use, and the various areas that a city attorney tends to get involved in. I think you contract out most of your water legal work, but they should be well experienced in employment law, land use, advising the police and fire chiefs, and those other areas of municipal operations.
Any other questions? We're right on schedule for our time. Not seeing any more questions. Chuck, thank you very much for the time you spent with us today and the time that you'll be with us tomorrow.
I'll
Appreciate
be
it.
here tomorrow. Anybody thinks of anything, then I think Eric would probably be glad to relay questions or contact me directly.
Thank you,
Okay,
Chuck.
thank you. We're going to take about a 5-minute break because that's what it'll take to set up the tables for the 2 boards. Okay, we're back in session. It's Tuesday, October 25th, and we've just finished a 5-minute break between two items on our agenda. This is the study session for the City Council on October 25th. Agenda item B, which is ID 16-253. It's the South Platte Park Intergovernmental Agreement and Management Plan update. And we're doing this together with the South Suburban Board and a number of South Suburban staff folks assisting, as well as the people who've put together the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to our Deputy City Manager, and he will assist us in making introductions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council, and South Suburban Board. Thank you for being here. Tonight, we'll be reviewing the management plan, as the mayor said, as well as the IGA. These are proposed changes that have been brought about, meeting of the minds with the staffs of the two organizations. Scott Latona with South Platte Park will actually be presenting much of this discussion. But before we get started, John, would you like to introduce your board members and other staff that are present?
Yes, thank you. I'm John Ostermiller, Chairman of the South Suburban Park and Recreation District Board. Joining me this evening are board members Pam Eller, Mike Anderson, and Scott LaBrache. We also have our Executive Director, Rob Hanna, this evening, and Andy Jennings, who is Director of Parks and Open Space for South Suburban. And also, Scott, you've mentioned already, so I think we're set to go. Thank you very much.
Don't miss Brett over there, too.
Oh, Brett. You don't want to sit at the table, Brett? Brett Collins, our Director of Planning. I guess he wants to stay over there.
I understand. Thank you. So, like I said, we'll run through the management plan and the proposed changes, follow up with the IGA, and then we'll also, lastly, ultimately, as we move forward with this, we'll take your comments. We do plan to host a public meeting as well to gain public comments and then bring back a final draft for your joint consideration again. So with that, I'll bring up Andy Jennings, Director of Parks and Rec, Parks and Open Space for South Suburban.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Tonight, Scott's going to be presenting the revisions of the management plan for South Platte Park. As you may recall, back in the early 80s, there was an agreement between the City of Littleton and South Suburban to develop a master plan for the park and authorize South Suburban to manage the park. That plan had 4 visions or 4 goals that were set up to preserve the floodplain, manage the area as a natural ecosystem, restore the indigenous species, provide regional environmental education, and provide opportunities for leisure recreation. So Scott's, as we've gone through the revisions, he's tried to make sure that those goals have been maintained. In 1996 was the first management plan that was put together. It was updated in 99, again in 2009, and then we have the update to present to you guys tonight. And this will not be a page-by-page review, but kind of a high-level general review of the plan. And with that, I'll turn it over to Scott.
Thank you. And while we're doing introductions, I'd like to introduce one more person. Against the back wall here is Ron Reinfert. He was an intern with Metro State University, and he spent 200 or 300 hours putting together the GIS data that goes into the maps that are in this plan. So he spent a good portion of his life volunteering his time to the park last year to get this all ready. All right. So as Andy mentioned, there were the 4 goals for the park. The original master plan also put forth a vision that the park would be intended to be to capture the essence of a natural river valley and allow for visitor opportunity while providing an undisrupted area for wildlife retreat. And a couple of the concepts that were in there that were real key was to have a core zone of high use and a core zone of habitat use, and then try and blend those areas together to provide for all of the different goals that were there. There was also the idea of having limited parking areas and access to try to help control the numbers, to minimize the signage and facilities so that it had a feel of a natural area. And we really tried to hold true to that through the number of years since that all happened. South Platte Park is a healthy, natural area along the river, and it is completely within the beltway of the metro area, so people come here seeking a place to get away. And when the park was first conceptualized and all of the original plans, this was very much a rural area. The earliest photo I can find prior to after the creation of the park was the 1993. So the park has been in existence for 10 years during the time of this photo. You can see there's not much development between Platte Canyon and Santa Fe. And at that time, some of the surveys and things that went into the master plan, there was concern seeing 183 people using a section of the park on a particular day. Flash forward to where we are now. You can see development has definitely come into the area, and with a couple of the large properties that are still zoned for development and under consideration nearby, a number of residential areas are moving closer to the park. It's no longer a wildlife area out in the middle of nowhere. We're completely surrounded by the city at this point. The Greenway Trail now brings an estimated 580,000 visitors per year, and a single 1 hour count this summer, we had over 520 visitors in that 1 hour. So compared to the 183 people in a day, the use is much higher than had been anticipated at that point. That does not include the programming that we do, which is about 5,000 program registrants a year, another 13,000 that drop into the Nature Center, and we have not yet figured out how to get to register all the boaters and fishermen that wander in from all the different points. This is kind of the trend from August of 2014 through March of this year, and just kind of showing the fluctuation through the different years, or through the different months. The blue line is what happens at the Carson Nature Center. The green line is the main Greenway Trail. And it's just interesting to me that the Nature Center trailhead really reflects the overall use, even though we're getting exponentially more people coming in on the Greenway Trail on those really nice user days. You can kind of judge it from what happens at the Nature Center trailhead. The park is in use at all hours of the day, even at the 2 and 3 a.m. There are hits on the trail counter. They are fairly low, but the trends change throughout the year, and the Greenway Trail has changed in its character from being a place people came to recreate for an hour or two to being a critical regional transport zone. And months of the year, even in our slowest month, we're looking at 20,000 visitors per year, or per month, in the month of December. So, you know, when we look at how the park has survived this much of a change, it really comes down to holding true to those characteristics, having the core use zones, which is the bright magenta color on here, having some of the wildlife retreat areas, which would be the orange sections, and then having some blended areas in between where people and wildlife can interact a little more directly. In terms of the updates for the plan, we are looking to hold true to those essential core characteristics with a few updates as we've learned more and park management has developed and city codes have changed and things along those lines. The plan that was provided to you, there's about 60 comment bubbles that are off into the margins to just point out some of the main changes. I started looking at a red line version and it would have been a tremendous headache to read. But I wanted to highlight a few of the main changes that are in here. The first one, and this is where Ron spent a lot of his time working with me, is to try and figure out what are actually the management sites. So the City Council has designated certain areas, and here it's the dark green picture. Those are the things that are officially part of South Platte Park, and all of the rules adhere to them. There are another, I believe it's 13 sites that we have some sort of management responsibility for. So the city open space was purchased with Reynolds Landing. The Newton Buffer property has its own conservation easement to it, but it is managed by the park staff. So just trying to look at all those different parcels and make sure we're paying attention to them. And the plan calls that out in pretty good detail. We've also gone through and tried to find all of the buried things in the park. The electric lines, sewer lines, water lines, fiber optics, gas lines. There's a tremendous number of utilities that cross the park. And with a recent relining of one of the sewer lines in the park, we kind of realized if each utility has to address their utility once every, or their easement once every 15 years or so, then we may be seeing a disturbance in the park about every year. There's that many easements. So really trying to manage that and work with the contractors to minimize the disturbance to the open space. We looked at some of the policies. There's a no collecting policy that references plants and animals, but we wanted to expand that to minerals. We get occasional requests for gold panning, gold mining, and dredging in the river, and the rules have not been really clear about that, so we wanted to address that. Crayfish trapping is a legal means of take, but there is no limit placed on it in the state. And so in a very heavily used place like South Platte Park, we wanted to still allow people to go out and catch crayfish a little bit, kids doing entertaining kinds of things, but not having somebody take out 200 or 300 pounds, which has been happening in the park at times. We've updated the sections on noxious weeds. When the plans were originally written, this was a restored gravel mine that had 3 or 4 species growing out in the fields. Most of that was knapweed and thistle. We have moved out of that restoration zone. We have a very healthy natural ecosystem, but there are a number of new weeds in Colorado that we are working on managing, and a lot of new techniques that were not being addressed back in the 1980s. In this particular photo, the bright green plant that you see is common buckthorn. This has not been identified by the state yet, but when you hike through our forest now, it's the only thing that's still green in October, and it's staggering the number of shrubs that are in that area that are causing problems. So we expect to see that one coming up soon. The water section has been significantly expanded. Water management in the metro area changed significantly during the drought of 2002, and there were a lot of very creative exchanges between water entities and water providers that basically took water out of the river and used city water systems to transport it down to the eastern plains. So we've added details into the system that addresses the in-stream flow rights that are jointly held by the city and South Suburban. Changes to how the river functions, changes that we anticipate with the Chatfield reallocation process, which is under the design phase right now, and really looking at the river as being the most threatened habitat piece in the river because of that. We are now 8 weeks with 0 release out of Chatfield, and I just saw on the news tonight 4 inches below normal precipitation for this time of year, so it's pretty amazing out there. This is a photo taken just about a week ago. You can actually step across the river with only getting 1 foot wet at this point. The plan also references some management direction. So looking at managing beaver, prairie dogs, people dropping off animals into the park, requests to come and help with injured wildlife, and all of those kinds of questions. So really trying to clarify some of the policies around that. One of the bigger philosophical changes is going to the limits of acceptable change. So rather than saying this park can sustain 2 beaver lodges or saying 183 people is the top carrying capacity, we're going back in and we're looking at what are the indicators of what we want this user experience to be like. And just one example, I think Councilwoman Brinkman is particularly interested in social trails and shares our frustration with them. So we've done a social trail survey and looking at and saying, is this network appropriate? Does this make you feel crowded? Does this make the habitat seem overused? And coming up with some standards for those kinds of things, and then choosing a trigger point and saying, okay, that's too many trails, we're gonna start closing some sections, or maybe we'll develop some beach areas into better fishing areas and attract more people to those rather than having the whole web of veins through there. The section on how the Greenway Trail functions, we've tried to clarify that as well. The park hours are sunrise to sunset, and obviously from the chart, there are people using it at all times of the day, and if we were to close the Greenway Trail, we would interrupt the commute of quite a number of people. So trying to clarify that if people are on the Greenway Trail and traveling through on the concrete, they are welcome to do that, but if they're moving off and using the lakes and going down into the natural, the wildlife areas and things, then that's when we would be enforcing the
Can I ask a
sunrise to
question about
sunset.
that?
Yes.
And also just, do you want us to ask questions as you move along?
Yeah, I think that'd be fine.
Okay. In one of the chapters of what we were provided to prepare for tonight, it talks about the Greenway Trail and those hours, and it suggested extending 3 hours further into the evening and I believe 6 a.m. in the morning, I don't recall exactly, because of the commuter traffic. And that commuter traffic is significant in those very early morning hours. Can you address that for a moment? Because it really does impact when we have signs up that say what the park's hours are. It's a little hard then to say, but, you know, if you're commuting and traveling through on a bicycle, they're different. Just how are we going to manage all that?
It is very difficult to manage. The concept would be anybody can access the Greenway Trail off of the Mineral Avenue Trail or from the north and south points, but the other gates would be closed and the access points from the communities would be places that we could still enforce those time limits. So we tried to get it in line with the other parks that South Suburban manages without going to a 24-hour timing on that trail.
The one I was thinking of was like the Lee Gulch Trail down behind St. Mary's. That's a great way for a commuter to get on there, but it's not exactly what you just described. It's not one of the main trailheads. They're going to have to travel down Lee Gulch, which is a park. Early morning hours, theoretically, it's closed. We're talking the Platte plan here, but it's those accesses. I just think we need to make this as accessible as we can to commuters and bicyclists who work out even in those early morning hours. And I just didn't see the answer really in there, if there is one.
And I'm not entirely clear if you're looking for changing hours for all the parks and how that relation is, or the South Platte Park hours in particular.
We're at South Platte Park tonight, but I just see that as a network.
Yes, yeah, I agree. And one of our challenges is if you go to a 24-hour type of a cycle on your trails, how does that impact overnight use? And, you know, trying to balance some of the homeless issues and things like that.
Right, well, that was going to be my question, Scott, which is, being a late night and early morning user of the Greenway, there are some folks that may not seem to be traveling through that I've encountered along the trail. How does the plan address that, extend that into the relationship between rangers and the police and other emergency response, and maybe address that if it's later, I can't remember, but addressing that and how that's coordinated.
And some of the policy details of that, or the procedural details of that, we call out in the limits of acceptable change, how many contacts at night, and what our recommendation has been is to do occasional sting operations and just contact folks and kind of get the word out that, yeah, somebody is paying attention in this park and you may get contacted after hours between the South Suburban Rangers and the city police.
And I was just going to kind of assume that when you're talking about the cement use, the dual trail is what you really mean.
Right.
So it's not just folks on the cement, because there are, you know, a number of joggers. I imagine they aren't necessarily commuting, although there is a couple of pedestrians that I know are commuting to work that will be using the dual trail, but at hours that might be perceived by some as dusk or pre-sunrise.
Yes.
I also think we're trying to distinguish between I think we're trying to distinguish something between a trail use and a park use, and I think we can work through those if we can get some acceptance that that's kind of what we're trying to get to with this management plan, how our rangers and more importantly the Littleton PD can, you know, enforce those rules. So trying to distinguish in between trailhead use, park use, and the trail, I think is what we're trying to get to. I don't think we have all the answers tonight, but I think what we're trying to get is a concept. Is it acceptable to be able to use this great, you know, corridor that we have through this great park, and extended hours for those who get up early, who commute or whatnot, and then we can work out with staff, with our staff, and again, even your PD, is how that's best enforced and signed. I know we have a new sign program that's that we're establishing through there, and maybe we can distinguish between a trail use and a park use, and this is going to take education, as well too. So I think that's what Scott's talking about, our rangers going out and not so much doing a sting operation, but I would call it more of a informational and operation.
Enforcement.
And that's the discussion that I was hoping we'd have, that is left a little bit open in the plan.
Yeah. So again, what we're trying to get is do you guys agree that is an appropriate use outside of the dawn to dusk hours, or within those dawn to dusk hours?
I would suggest that what Scott and I have had this conversation, we've also had this conversation at South Platte Working Group, and it's about the increased use of the facility. And the intention of keeping the trail open is because you do have commuters. You have commuters on there all day long, and they are not, and into the night, and particularly in the fair weather. The weather gets bad and things get different. But so it's not really about the people that are on the bike highway going from point A to point B, usually from work to home. It's about people that go into the park after hours, usually during the dark, and there's typically not a whole bunch of good intentions going with them. And that's where we end up finding issues start to occur within the park. And so I think when we're looking at what are we going to do about the hours on the trail and that type of thing, it's what type of behaviors are we going to try not to discourage, and what behaviors do we need to discourage based on those hours. I know that it's a popular place for high school kids during the summer. There's also, and 2 o'clock in the morning and 10 kids roll out of a car. That's probably not a good thing. So the other thing I think we need to talk about at some point is enforcement, and how do you enforce that, and how do you, one thing to put up a sign, there it is, dark, nobody can read it, probably not in a mental state that they're reading anyway, but how do you enforce that? I mean, there's always been a hesitancy to really do any strong enforcement of that stuff, but I think looking at the behaviors we're trying to exclude and the behaviors we're welcoming is key to how we solve that problem.
Make a note just to come back with that question a little bit as well. So, okay. I'll move on just a couple more points and then open it wide open. Let's see. The trail width, the original master plan recommended 12 feet. The last two management plans scaled that back to the 10-foot concrete trail. As we're looking at the volume of use and some of the safety standards nationwide, the 12-foot is making more sense. So kind of going back to allowing that standard, not saying that we're going to go in and have funds and make that change, but at least making that an option as we look at dual trail and I'm not sure what we call the trail on either side of the river north of the park, but trying to get that traffic to merge and function safely, because it is a very busy place. As Rob had mentioned, the signage plan update, mostly referring to, or pulling out the key characteristics of the signage plan from that master plan, the idea of as minimal signage as possible, having it blend into the environment, but taking out the specifics for the routed wood and those kinds of things so that we can adapt as technology changes. The river use and boating section has had a fair amount of work as well, and that's because some of the challenges with some of the laws and the rules. Folks have been using the river for forever as a great place to recreate and cool off, and the numbers that we're seeing are getting quite large, especially as some of the river sports are becoming more popular. Some of the rules have included, at this point it said no wading and no swimming. The state defines inner tubing as a form of swimming, and I think everybody's generally been in agreement that we don't want to ban tubing from the river altogether. So trying to update that language, going to the concept of swimming or bathing, the idea of we don't want a swim beach where people are laying and lounging in the water, but allowing fishing for fly fishermen, for people who are engaged in nature exploration and putting some regulations on tubing that does allow it with some limitations.
With that, Scott, I know at least north of the park, and I'm not sure whether any of it has extended into the park, there's been some, I'll refer to it as commercial use going on with water recreation. How is that being addressed?
Actually, back in about 2004, the board and council had come up with a plan to do a commercial use permit. So we manage those out of the nature center.
So there is a permit process?
There is, and I believe the budget has a proposed fee change this year, but it's about $1 a head for commercial use. And we've got 6 or 7 entities that use those permits every year right now. And then looking at the original master plan, talked about no remote control toys, trying to minimize the motorized activities and just trying to expand that to exclude some of the drones and newer technology and really intentionally make this a place for retreat from sound.
And that's one we need to go back to the attorneys on, because this has been changing rules. FAA's made some changes in what their expectations are for the fair use of drones, and they've limited the ability of us to control it, and this is just happening almost as we're speaking. So we do need to get the attorneys involved. I'm not sure what the outcome will be of that.
Okay.
We may not be able to control them to the extent that we would like to, unless we're able to find some tremendous exception because of the wildlife issues and the things that make it a park. But I did talk to one of the attorneys, and I did not feel comfortable after talking to them that we're going to be able to find that exception. So.
Okay, yeah, at this point, we have been doing educational contacts and mostly focusing on the interaction between the flying remote control vehicles and the Raptors, and then the sound impacts for the other users.
To help in the discussion with the attorneys, at least from my perspective, I'd rather not have noise making. I mean, folks can have motorized vehicles, but not on those trails. So, I mean, there's a consistent piece that's, I would look at this, and if someone wanted to tell the attorneys, we know what we want the answer to be, help us get there.
Yeah, I think there's an extreme risk to the wildlife, to the hawks and the eagles and that type of thing to be, there's enough for them to deal with out there to now fighting for airspace too.
Yes, the area has certainly changed.
Well, and, you know, we can refer them to a number of places. The model plane airfield is in Chatfield, and some of our other parks, it would be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Scott, the area of the limits of acceptance change. For your early photo and the current photo, was certain buffer zone around the perimeter boundaries of the park itself. How those we address through studies and knowledge that will change to wildlife, as opposed to the standards that we try to in terms of people count and things of that nature.
Actually, the draft that we have for limits of acceptable change do include some of those, looking at the health of the, some of the mammal populations. We do, through a lot of volunteer activity, we track wildlife populations, the breeding bird census, we do winter waterfowl census, so looking at some of those changes. And we actually have a couple of students right now that are working on crunching that data and seeing what's happened to the trends in duck populations over the last 30 years. And so we are definitely looking at that. There are, just anecdotally, species that were more common that are very rare in the park now. There are things that were of state concern that you could find in the park that haven't been seen in a while. So we are trending towards that urban generalist wildlife species or collection. But we haven't turned that corner to be, a city park type thing. So, so we definitely are tracking those. And that actually kind of just brings up my last slide here, and that is, as we move forward, what are some of your questions, comments, revisions, other maps you want to discuss, or sections of the plan that really brought up your questions, that this would be a good time to address.
Going back to Mike's question, Scott, is in the encroachment where we start seeing, residential get closer and closer to the park, at some points right at the very edges of the lake. Are we seeing any negative impacts with drainage and such with that?
With each development, we have been included on the referrals, and we work with the developers to come up with the design that has the least impact. So, for example, the Aspen Grove and Berkshire Apartments, there's a wetland complex that was built to handle the runoff from there, and we do see quite a bit of the macro litter, the big chunks of things that float off the parking lots, and the vehicle fluids and nutrients are in the water there, but it does get filtered before it gets into the heart of the park and into the river. And so looking at some of the upcoming development proposals, we do have some design concepts in mind of borders that have worked and some of the borders that have been more challenging, where we have individual backyards with individual gates and landscaping that flows into the park. And those are the sections that are harder to manage.
My question is more towards the major renovations we're going to see in the area of the Enzer property, the Tuck property, also the RTD area there at Mineral and Santa Fe. Just being able to apply things we've learned and maybe make some changes going forward, to kind of request some changes to kind of protect that park. So.
And there are a few sections in the plan that I would, perhaps draw your attention to make sure that these are the statements that these bodies want to make, but they do address those in particular. The East Trail is where the Enzer property backs up to, and we're recommending that remain a 3-foot natural surface walking trail. The developers have looked at that, and there's been several people several corporations that have looked at it and said, we'd love to see this as an 8-foot paved connection to the Greenway Trail. And so do we want that? Yes. So, do we want to put that in this document and say, no, we want to keep it to 2 access points and pedestrians only? With the Tuck property, working with Columbine Valley, there has not been interest for that community to have a trail connection and public outside of their community accessing the west side of the river there. So do we continue to move forward with that as developments come along?
Yeah, for the main concern there is more of what size of a buffer we feel is necessary to protect that part of the park, so.
And there was a buffer plan, I think it's Appendix 6 or so. It's quite a few years old now, but there were, I believe, 4 parcels or 5 parcels on there, and we've managed to, in some way, protect or purchase all but 2 of those, and one is on Enzer, trying to see if there's any more of that available. One is on Tuck to see if there's any help there, so. Yeah.
Thank you.
If I could, the acting city manager would like to address the Enzer property, because some things are happening there. And before that, I just wanted to comment that buffering and that moving in of residential, I do have concerns about the northern part of Cooley Lake and what's happening with Columbine Valley. The country club, has always had kind of an open vista out to the river, but I'm not sure, where that's going to fit into the future plans of protecting wildlife and accesses and social trails through the golf course or whatever. I just see probably some issues there. I just want to raise that point, but I do want to have the issue of what's going on with Enzer put out so we all know what's going on.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Just as a kind of a quick update, it does appear that the entire Enzer property is moving forward in some kind of a development here with 2 separate developers. Don't really have a lot of specifics at this point, but we've met a couple of times now as staff, basically introduction meetings, and but it does look like pretty positive that they're going to be moving forward. So I guess the point being is that obviously we're going to have to work with South Suburban and others as we look at kind of the transition from their property into our park. And obviously we've got significant issues here to try to manage. They appear to be very aware of some of their circumstances there and willing to obviously engage in that discussion. So again, very preliminary, but it does appear they're moving forward.
All
I'll add on to that, too. The East Side Trail Scott mentioned is to remain in the proposed plan is to remain as it has been managed, which is a gravel, limited-use trail. And it'd be desirable, should NSER actually develop, that they develop some internal trail systems to take the people that will be there and push them out into the mineral corridor so that they can be dropped there rather than using the East Side Trail. So that's something that we hope to work towards.
Yeah,
This is off of NSER, but it involves surrounding properties. You address herbicides and pesticides, and that you're making sure they're applied according to standards. It came to my attention recently that Columbine Valley sprays for mosquitoes. Is there any way that we can effectively share information? We certainly don't have any regulatory power over surrounding neighborhoods, but that doesn't affect the pollinators and all kinds of stuff that's in the park that's good. Can we have, is there any kind of a dialogue we have with them about proper use of herbicides and pesticides and other sides?
Yeah.
That we can,
I've not had that communication with them currently, but Arapahoe County was doing all of the mosquito management up to about 4 years ago or so, and with their budget changes, it came back to the homeowners, or the landowners. So South Suburban has taken on, we do a bactericide or a larvicide into the water that just impacts the mosquito larva, and yeah, it would be nice to be able to talk across that border and have some consistency there, so.
So, question with a lot of ignorance in my brain here. Is there any way, any kind of designation we could make that would allow us to restrict some things? Like, I don't know if a refuge or something else, you know, what else is out there that might allow us to do some restricting to address some of the things that, the challenges?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any statutory changes that we would do. A lot of those are terms that would be used by other entities like the National Fish and Wildlife Service. You know, they manage national wildlife refuges, so without turning over the jurisdiction of the properties, I'm not sure that those kinds of things could apply. I think it's mostly in the rules and regulations of city code and what we apply here, but it looks like Rob.
So we own the property and manage the property as a group, so we can dictate what we want on the property. We could put conservation easements on it. We could do all these kind of things. What we're trying to balance with this management plan is access to the public and for lack of better terms, carrying capacity of the park, and trying to create a document that allows us to manage that as professionals as opposed to coming up with numbers or even conservation easements saying, no one shall step foot, no one shall do these things. And I think we're trying to create a balance here, and that's why this management plan, you know, is so thick that it does try and look at all the different angles, because we understand this is a gem within our boundaries, and we want people to take advantage. We just don't want people to abuse that, so that's what we're trying to do. We can put all kinds of regulations and, again, conservation easements if that's the direction we want to go. What we're recommending is creating a document that looks at, again, the carrying capacity and understanding that might change throughout the years as different impacts change. I think the biggest threat or things that we need to look at, as we've talked about, is the Tuck property and the Enzor property. And our recommendation is, again, to limit those access points. And I know you guys are going to get pressure, especially on the Enzor property, to allow a lot of access through there just because of the zoning. If it's a multifamily commercial on the Tuck property, it's mostly residential, so those guys don't want people coming through their development. So, but I think we're going to get a lot of pressure from that Enzor property, and this document will help us with your planning department kind of back up what we want in this. So I think it's very important to again, think about that as we look at this management plan.
I think one of the lessons, share this with me, one of the lessons learned about the Aspen Grove is to have a really good educational program with the residents and to not but I think it's going to be incumbent upon us to be encroachment of the population because we know what, for those regular users of the park, there's an appreciation for things that other users may not even know is there. And there's a reason why it shuts down at dusk, because there's a whole population of critters that's when their active time is. And for those that aren't active, it's their sleeping time. So it's time for us to get out of there. And so I think it's just helping people understand some of that so that there can continue to be a wide appreciation of it. The more you appreciate it, the better you take care of it. And so I think that's going to be incumbent upon us to be very, very proactive with that, because I know that was one of the things that helped to change some of the behaviors you were seeing with dogs off leash from those apartments, and there just was not an understanding that this is why we don't do that. Not because we want to be bad cops, but we don't do it because we have a really cool coyote population and the pups are out hunting right now. So your dog isn't helping that situation. Those are the types of things I think that help people change behaviors. And so, then there's always the 10%, but I think that's something that we need to keep forefront.
I might take that opportunity to use that comment and circle back to your earlier comment about enforcement. This plan doesn't address the enforcement philosophy. We do that through our ranger standard operating procedures for our rangers. Generally, it's been positive communications, positive contacts, citing for multiple offenses or repeat offenders, those kinds of things. So I've heard the enforcement and restriction comment from a couple different people tonight. If there's a desire to change that, this document would be the first place to do that. But we've also, that's evolved out of our conversations with city attorneys, with the judges, whether or not they'll enforce regulations, with staff, what do we want the interaction with the public to be? The two bike rangers that these two entities have funded for the last couple of years, they've written very few tickets, but they have made thousands of contacts, and they have significantly improved behaviors on the trail through those positive contacts. And if we get another 1,200 homes along one of the borders or so, we may need to be a little stricter with the enforcement. So that's the opportunity to discuss and look at that.
I think it might be a good idea for us to put that on some place to talk about it, because when we did talk about it before, it was very different. And now there's kind of a different, the park is being more widely used. We've done a lot of things at the park. We've made some improvements. We've added trailheads. We're adding some of the dimensions in the river and different things like that. And I think with the population that's, even if they're not up against the river, people are wanting to get into that natural more as all the surrounding areas get more dense. So it might be a good idea for us to revisit. We may not want to change anything, but I'd sure like to look at it again and see if it's keeping pace with the times.
And I think too, as we've had 2 points. Rob we want to differentiate between the trail users and the park users. We do have those diehard trail users that really understand and know how nice it is to be able to go through the trail. We have some hits at 2 a.m. Hopefully those are good users. But those people that go through the trail, in my guess, appreciate what they have. And to me, those are the best people that can report bad behavior in the trail in the hours where the rangers may not be there, the police may not be there. While they don't engage, they can still report. And I think it would be very, very beneficial to start that kind of an engagement with the public to say, hey, if you're going through there, yeah, we're looking at possibly allowing it. We can take it away. However, if you see any bad behavior in the park at the time you're going through, please report it. Do not engage, but report, and we will follow up.
You mean that night you were out there with the bow hunting and
Yeah,
the
that was
flashlight?
bad. Yeah,
That was it? Okay.
Yeah. So that would be a bad thing. So, but I'm thinking in those users could be very, very beneficial as they're going through the park at all hours of the day with their bikes or whatever, so.
So to Debbie's comment, we're writing down here for a potential study session. And I think when we did it last time, we involved the chief of police, we involved your head ranger.
Yeah.
I think you were involved too, I'm sure. And we came up with some ideas. And I think we need to probably do that again because there's more out there than there was then.
Yeah. River safety too, because that's a whole nother element with the more and more of the use of the river. And what I found interesting is that the Platte, our stretch of the Platte will stay open during spring runoff when other rivers will shut down. They'll shut down Clare Creek and they'll shut down some of the others because they get so much more water. So when those shut down, it's getting more and more widely known that the Platte is still open. And so the use of that is becoming increasingly increased.
Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, changing slightly, but involving other neighbors around and other involved parties. You mentioned a public hearing, Scott. What's being done with the developer at Tuck? I know Mike's working with the developers that might be having some discussions around Enzer, but I would think a conversation with them also. We have boundaries with Jefferson County as well as the Corps of Army Engineers, and their pieces of the park or that would be to engage them or at least make them aware of what's being planned and looked at in addition to dealing with the public at large.
Yeah, and Scott, I know I brought this up a long time ago and it didn't really fly in the discussion, but we have that little triangle of land down at C-470 that belongs actually to Arapahoe County. And there's no issues that have arisen that I'm aware of, but part of the master plan talks about annexing where appropriate in order to smooth out boundaries or to smooth things. I'd really think it would be great to relook that. And I have no idea whether the police chief would support that or, whatever, but we have an enforcement issue that we can facilitate by having access to that as ours to begin the enforcement process. It's basically a major trailhead at the south end of our issue, and we don't really own it. I think a small annexation of that would really, ultimately down the road prove meaningful. But when I've brought it up in the past, I know it fell to the side because of other priorities.
Yeah,
and I don't know if council's interested in it or not.
Say this last 16 months, there's been a lot of discussion between Jeffco, Arapahoe County, and us for EMS response down there because everybody has a different address. From the time you come in the gate off of Platte Canyon, you're Jefferson County into Littleton, back to Jefferson County, then to Arapahoe County. So depending on where the car window gets broken, there's 3 different agencies that can respond. I think one of the challenges is that federal core piece. So.
We have a pause. Any other comments or questions for Scott or discussion?
I say I thought the master plan revisions were excellent. Very good job.
Thank you.
Excellent job.
Rob, you have a comment at the end? Back to
Yeah, I just wanted to, if this discussion is over with, I just wanted to give a quick update on our master plan process. So.
Any other questions for Scott? And then we'll just move briefly into the other master plan.
Can I get a key to the gate? I hate climbing over it.
I would mention if there are editorial changes, grammar things, feel free to email those, and I'll get those taken care of before the next step. But I also want to make sure we don't miss the management agreement, because that's significantly different than the management plan. That was the other piece in this agenda.
Okay, so
before we get off of this, I would like to just get on the record. Jim Taylor was not able to be here this evening. He had sent an email out. I don't know if anybody from the city, it doesn't look like it was copied on it, but we can make it available to you. Jim brought up the thought of looking into the purchasing of Nevada Ditch. I have no idea what would be involved in that. I know it's important to keep water in it. He also discussed the no additional benches, but I did see in there we do want to use logs and rocks and those types of things for resting places. So I think that takes care of that. And he had the suggestion of building a crusher fine trail on top of the sewer line easement that goes through the park. And that's, he mentions on page 10, there's a map that shows the alignment of that sewer line. And
Yeah, and that one is the one comment that.
I had thought that was going to be revegetated, but.
It's basically the green, what he's referring to, this green route here. And that runs through the lake area and makes all the connections into the Columbine Valley that we're proposing to avoid in other sections of the plan, so.
Scott, on page 9, you talk about the South Metro Land Conservancy holding the easement to the property. I'm having some memory that was changed to some other entity.
You're correct, council member. That was changed to Colorado Open Lands now manages that. They took that over from South Metro Land Conservancy.
You're talking about
So that should be addressed as well.
Is that the
Page 9.
answer?
Answer.
Do they have Newton as well, or does?
They do have Newton.
That's the buffer that was purchased.
thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Good job, thanks, Scott.
Briefly, I just wanted to touch on the IGA that we included. Really, it's the IGA is essentially an update from the 1983 IGA. It addresses, rather than contemplating the formation and the development of the park, it addresses maintaining and improving the park and those processes that are in place. There's a couple sections that have been removed, and basically one of them relates to any equipment that came with the park. Well, all that equipment has now been, it's no longer there. It's been a few years.
Recycled.
Yeah, let's say recycled. So, and then lastly, the few other changes. One of them is number 6 on the, what's called the First Amendment to the agreement, looks at specifically shifting over responsibility for maintaining the river gauge. And that's just South Suburban staff are there on the river, see the gauge, and have the ability to better maintain that and understand it a little bit more than our staff do. And so that shifts that responsibility over to them. And there may be some additional financial component to that, but we think that's an important thing to maintain those water rights that we have. And then the only other deletion was the South Platte Park Improvement Fund. It no longer exists. So essentially, it's just a fairly minor update to that IGA, but we feel it was important to modernize that some.
So Mike, I've got a question that's probably a little sensitive, so I know I'm bringing it up because there's been a lot of discussion on it over the last several years. But in the original plan back in 1983, the city was going to be the owner of the property, whatever the property was in the plan, and then the manager was going to be the South Suburban Parks. We have not done that a couple times on some property around the park area. We have, I think what drove it was the opportunity to combine some open space money and create a larger pot to be able to better control. So we made a decision, and this was early. In my time on council, we had to come back and relook at some of those agreements and determine a boundary for what was the north piece of the property and the south piece to be able to honor the purchases that have been made by both the city and the park. But just what is our moving forward philosophy in terms of that? Were we able to pick up any other buffer land? Were we to look at the Nevada ditch? Were we to look at something like that? With the funding mechanism really being open space money for the next 8 years or whatever, are we going to change what was our philosophy about who owns it and who maintains it?
I think in general, it's taken on a case-by-case basis, and depending on funding and who's got funding available and whatnot, we'll come to you, and you'll likely have to make that decision through a budgetary action. But in general, I think the way it has been working is working. And
With the exceptions that came up?
Sure. And what pieces or what parcels are you specifically referring to?
One that I recall, I think, was the overlook over the lake that we're going to be going to in the next couple of weeks. I believe.
And in Reynolds was also.
Those are outside of the park,
Yeah, those
though.
are outside of the
Not
park.
actually, yeah, they're outside of the park, but that philosophy reflects something that might be as we pick up buffers in the park.
Okay. Thank you.
Where are we at? What's next? Okay, we'll go to the update.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, we're on our downhill path of our master plan and strategic plan. We're about halfway done. We just finished getting a report of all the survey information that the consultant provided. We've gotten a lot of great information. We've done online surveys, we've done scientific surveys, and we're compiling those in anticipation of our two public hearings that we have, our public meetings that we have coming up on November 10th and 17th. The 10th will be at Goodson at 6:30, so would invite all of you guys to attend that and to participate into that. They broke it out geographically as well too, so just interesting facts about the Littleton survey respondents. 96% of the respondents have visited a South Suburban park or facility in the last 12 months of the survey response.
Only 96%?
Only 96%. That was actually the highest of all. We broke it out into 4 geographic areas, and Littleton on its own. The highest use, of course, is Goodson and Buck, as you would anticipate. The things that, areas that they listed as needed improvements or upgrades in no specific order: Littleton Golf and Tennis Club, Cornerstone batting cages, outdoor sports fields, Colorado Journey, Sheridan, Goodson, Harlow Park, and Pool. Cornerstone Skate Park, which came up a lot in our survey results, that was probably one of the surprises that we saw in the results, is the comments on the Cornerstone Skate Park. So not sure what that means, but we did hear that quite a bit. Playgrounds, large community parks, recreation programs and activities, and website. Website came up a lot on our surveys too, wanting an update of our website. People find that they can get information, but they feel the website's outdated, so, and we don't particularly disagree with that. Evenly split when asked, should we offer traditional or diverse programs? Littleton was pretty much split 50-50 on those. Other communities such as Lone Tree and Sheridan were not. They were actually on opposite ends, as you might expect. Sheridan wanted more of the traditional, and Lone Tree some of the more diverse.
Those are the people playing pickleball.
Pickleball, that was a high commented area as well too. And a common theme is take better care of what we have and reinvesting, which I think we've heard through many different surveys and interactions with the public. So not a whole lot of new information or surprising information. It really affirmed what we were thinking. So next steps is we're going to start formulating what action plans and what that the master plan recommendations are. So at the November 10th and 17th, we'll actually have some polling where things pop up on the screen and people in the audience, we will get immediate reactions to, do you support, not support? So it'll be a fun, interactive opportunity for interaction amongst the two. And again, our plan is to formally adopt these plans in the first quarter of 2017. So just a quick update and available to answer any questions you guys might have.
Any questions? Have we covered every topic that we need to cover as a group? Anything additional, John? Anything?
No, I think we're all square. Thank you
Scott?
for the opportunity this evening. We appreciate it. Always getting together with the council, and it's good to have these meetings more frequently than less.
Just my closing comment. We all know this is the jewel of Littleton, and it hasn't always been that. And it's been because of the joint effort and the involvement of very involved community, very involved citizens, a very active South Suburban, a very active city of Littleton, and now today, up and down that river, an active involvement of a lot of jurisdictions with the South Platte Working Group. I mean, this all didn't just happen. It took a lot of people's work, and this is just the next iteration of it. And I think it's a great document, great place to move forward from, so thank you. And I think we're done.